Channel 2 News at 6 with Jim Jensen, Rollins Smith, Warner Wolf on sports, and Dr. Frank Field with weather.
Good evening. As officials in states from New York to California pulled Tylenol capsules off shelves today, the company that manufactures the drug took its own action. Johnson & Johnson is now offering a $100,000 reward for the arrest and conviction of those responsible for spiking Tylenol capsules with deadly cyanide poisoning.
We have expanded team coverage this evening of today's developments, including a live report from the Food and Drug Administration in Washington. To begin with, Anthony Mason, who's been following the developments in Westchester all day long and has this live report. Anthony.
Roland, investigators who began yesterday with one Tylenol contamination case suddenly have two. Two cases, two sets of evidence, which strangely somehow seem to both connect with each other and to conflict with each other. Investigators confirmed today that the cyanide found in Tylenol capsules at this Bronxville Woolworths last night matches the cyanide found in the pills which killed Diane Ellsworth last Saturday.
It appears to be the same, chemically the same.
The second contaminated bottle was one of thousands confiscated from store shelves in a square-mile area of Bronxville after Ms. Ellsworth's death last Saturday. Police discovered the cyanide contamination in laboratory tests. Westchester County investigators say the latest evidence has put them no closer to a solution, but that Ms. Ellsworth's former fiancé and his family, who have been very cooperative, have now all but been eliminated as suspects.
It seems to me the focus would probably, in all likelihood, shift to the contamination of the pills occurring sometime during the manufacturing process.
Johnson & Johnson, the makers of Tylenol, point out that the lot numbers on the bottles indicate the first was made at the company's plant in White Marsh, Pennsylvania, while the second was made at a plant in Puerto Rico. But Westchester County DA Carl Vergare believes the second bottle of contaminated capsules could have been made in the same place as the first.
I'm told that while it did carry a Puerto Rico lot number, it's entirely possible, we cannot exclude the possibility that the second Woolworth bottle was manufactured in Pennsylvania.
Investigators were briefly sidetracked when three suspects arrested in another case were found with a copy of an extortion letter addressed to the Bronxville Police Department. The letter demanded $2 million to halt the Tylenol tamperings, but investigators are convinced the group had nothing to do with the poisonings. In Bronxville itself today, Woolworths was open again, but the store manager was reportedly away, being questioned by authorities. While on the streets, the people of Bronxville worried about both their health.
It's really upsetting because you go to a store, you have faith in the products you buy, and turn out that you hear people die innocently.
I would not buy Tylenol, period.
And their reputation.
We like to think Bronxville is a lovely village, very close to New York, and a lot of awfully nice people live here. And here we are, the focus of worldwide attention as a place that's harboring poisoned capsules.
For investigators now, much will depend on the Food and Drug Administration's test on the remaining Tylenol samples that were taken from that area, from this area, rather. For more on those now, let's go live via satellite to Betsy Ashton in Washington. Betsy.
Well, there were no new traces. This is the good news. No new traces of poison turned up in the testing overnight or today. Still, there are only 2 bottles that are known to have contained any tainted capsules. The FDA has now tested over 80,000 capsules taken from stores in Westchester County, but the testing will continue around the clock through this weekend.
The preliminary testing is taking place in the FDA's Brooklyn laboratories. Any suspect bottles are being flown to cyanide experts in Cincinnati for further investigation. Those experts worked all last night on the capsules taken from the second bottle, the one from the Bronxville Woolworths store. They found the poison in that bottle identical to the poison that killed Diane Ellsworth.
Well, I think it indicates certainly that there's a common source to the potassium cyanide used here. They're both 90% and they have the same properties. They have the same chemical fingerprint, if you would.
The government is checking to see if the 2 bottles might have come together at some distribution point, in some warehouse where some employee might have tampered with them. But officials here tell me they think that's unlikely. They still consider this a local event, that the bottles were picked off the shelves, opened, poisoned, and resealed in Westchester County. Still, the big question, How could someone poison 5 capsules, then reseal the bottle to match Tylenol's triple seal process?
The FDA thought Johnson & Johnson had one of the best tamper-proof packages in the country, but tamper-resistant it is, obviously not tamper-proof. In the meantime, anyone who recently purchased Tylenol capsules in Westchester County is being asked to perhaps look at them. Certainly don't take those capsules, but look at them. If you see a capsule where the printing is out of line, where Tylenol doesn't go straight through but is out of line, or perhaps where there is brown material in the white section of the capsule, contact the FDA regional office or take the capsules back to the store. But the FDA would like to see a jar like that. The FDA offices will be open all through this weekend. And now for word on the latest of what the manufacturer had to say, we're going to go live to Roseanne Coletti, who is at Johnson & Johnson headquarters in New Brunswick, New Jersey.
Well, Betsy, the manufacturer says $100,000. That's a reward that Johnson & Johnson is offering to anyone who can provide information leading to the solution of this baffling case. People with information are asked to call the following FBI toll-free number, 1-800-334-2344. Now, on the questions raised by investigators today that perhaps the 2 bottles were actually both manufactured in Pennsylvania, Johnson & Johnson officials say absolutely not, because the lot numbers are put on at the individual factories and the 2 bottles had different lot numbers. The bottles would have to come from different factories. In the question of how the bottles may have been adulterated, officials say it would have taken someone very clever, someone very sophisticated to tamper with those bottles.
Ladies and gentlemen, what's happened in Westchester and just over 3 years ago in Chicago is an act of terrorism, pure and simple.
Johnson & Johnson has already halted production of all Tylenol capsules. It's asking stores to take them off the shelves. It is increasing production of these, tablets and caplets, which they assert are tamper-proof since they are made in the solid form. They say it would be impossible to adulterate them without destroying the product. The chairman also says public reaction will help determine whether they ever make Tylenol capsules again.
Possible you might have to withdraw it permanently?
Yes, I think it's possible. I think the consumer is going to tell us that, by the way. And I don't really think there's an awful lot we can or should do to try to change the consumer's attitude in that regard.
Preliminary consumer reaction is beginning to trickle in on the basis of preliminary findings of random surveys being conducted by Johnson & Johnson. They know this much about what the public thinks on this whole thing so far, that most of the people questioned feel it is a local problem confined to the New York area. But even so, a significant number of people, as many as a little more than a third actually, question whether they will ever buy the capsules again, and not only the capsules, but whether or not they will actually buy the caplets or tablets again. 1/4 said they didn't know. And those are 2 items that are not being taken off of the shelves. That's it from here right now, Roland. Back to you.
Okay, thank you, Roseanne. After the first tainted Tylenol scare in 1982, the makers of the painkiller began selling their product with special plastic seals. But you may be alarmed to learn how simple it is to duplicate that seal. A Manhattan hobby shop worker today demonstrated for our camera how plastic used in repairing models can also be used to seal a pill bottle.
Again, with a little bit of patience around it, it could be sealed down perfectly well, that no one would know that it wasn't done from the manufacturer. Especially if it was done in red.
The makers of Tylenol warn users to carefully check the safety seals on the bottles, which say Tylenol Safety Seal. Any bottle with a plain red seal should not be used.
After this week's Tylenol contamination here in the New York area, authorities in Chicago have reactivated the task force from the 1982 Tylenol poisonings of 7 people in the Chicago area. They have not ruled out a possible connection with James Lewis, convicted of trying to extort $1 million from the manufacturers of Tylenol. The FBI has been checking on Lewis's wife, who lives in Boston, and was once fired by Johnson & Johnson, the makers of Tylenol. But so far, there is no evidence Lewis is involved in this case.
I didn't say that I didn't think there was no connection. I said there's no evidence. I'm paid not to guess. And we are trying to do whatever we can to determine if there is a connection.
Chicago officials are tapping their computer records from their 18-month investigation of the 1982 Tylenol case and giving all of that information to New York authorities.
You cannot buy Tylenol capsules in the tri-state area tonight. All bottles were yanked off the shelves today, and Connecticut and New Jersey joined New York in a total ban on sales. A total of 8 states have now banned the sale of Tylenol capsules. As our team coverage of the story continues, Chris Borgen went out to see that if that ban is being enforced.
It wasn't search and destroy, it was search and remove. Mac Habib and more than 125 other city inspectors on the prowl looking for Tylenol capsules. Yesterday, the capsules were ordered from the shelves by Governor Cuomo. But this morning, it didn't take long for the health department's Habib to find an offender. At first, store manager Isaac Saba insisted all had been removed, claiming he had even beaten the gun on compliance.
You took all the capsules out before they asked, is that the idea?
Yeah, we took them about 3 days ago.
But Habib's eyeball inspection proved otherwise. There on the shelf stood about 50 restricted packages.
So what will you do with this set?
I'm going to remove it and keep them in the safe after I count how many, and we'll keep it inside in a secure place.
Sorry about that, replied Saba. It must have been an employee slip-up.
The news yesterday, they're saying only in one place they found it, and maybe it's one lunatic guy, he put it, and that's it. So the girl, she put them back yesterday night.
Elsewhere, Habib's mission turned up no new suspects. At another store, in fact, the concerned manager had dumped his own personal Tylenol supply into his office trash can.
You took them all off the shelves, down the basement, and what did you do?
I'm going to bring it back to the company.
You sealed them?
I tried to get the money back from them.
As Habib continued his rounds, consumers viewed this latest Tylenol scare with a wary eye.
No, God forbid. I would throw out the capsules.
You wouldn't use a capsule?
No, never the capsules. That's being foolish. But the other little things, they call them Capulets.
No, Monica. The Capulets were the stuff of Romeo and Juliet. You meant Caplets. But nobody's perfect. Chris Borgen, Channel 2 News.
Perhaps the people most affected by the Tylenol ban are the elderly. They're among the biggest users of that drug and seem to have the most questions about what to do now. Richard Brown looks at the impact of the Tylenol problem on the elderly.
The most common complaint among the elderly is pain, and for many the solution is Tylenol. But now some don't know what to do.
I think a lot of people are afraid to take anything.
It's frightening the public so much that they stop taking medicine, the way I look at it, too. Because they're drilling it into you so much, they scare the people.
For many who have to use painkillers, they have come to trust whatever their doctors have prescribed, and a change in drugs is very upsetting.
It's confusing in that I haven't spoken with my doctor yet about what I might substitute or use instead.
I don't take capsules. And since I keep hearing that it's perfectly all right to use the pills, the regular pills, I'm not concerned at the moment. Of course, I'm listening to everything that goes on.
At the Jewish Home and Hospital in Manhattan, they have stopped using Tylenol. And according to doctors, there are alternatives.
Utilize buffered aspirin. If one wanted to avoid the aspirin route because of stomach upset and indigestion, simply walk into your pharmacist and ask for a Tylenol substitute.
Physicians point out there is no need for fear. If you are taking Tylenol capsules, you should stop and call your doctor. Richard Brown, Channel 2 News, Manhattan.
If you need a painkiller, there are many alternatives to Tylenol that can be purchased over the counter. Here with a rundown on some of your options is a member of our health and science team, Dr. Peter Salgo.
Jim, as you mentioned, people all over the city today were looking for just that. They were looking for Tylenol alternatives, and they found they didn't have to look too far to find them. At the Bellevue Pediatric Clinic today, mothers who had been told to avoid giving their children aspirin already knew that Tylenol wasn't the only capsule containing acetaminophen, the medication they were looking for. There were others.
Tempera.
Other manufacturers do make acetaminophen products, and that's perfect. That's their option to choose another brand of acetaminophen.
For anyone looking for a Tylenol alternative today, the city's pharmacies were well stocked. Pharmacist Jim Borello found most of his customers knew just what they were looking for.
Because I think they're pretty informed about it from last time. They know some of the products from last time.
Shoppers could find generic acetaminophen on the shelves, or they could buy it as Daytril, Anacin 3, Tempera drops for children, and St. Joseph's aspirin-free drops. There was Panadol and Percogesic, although Percogesic contains other ingredients in addition to acetaminophen. And that list is by no means complete. You should talk to your pharmacist about it. And there are other options as well. If you are looking for another source of non-aspirin pain reliever instead of acetaminophen, you might think of Ibuprofen. It's marketed as Nuprin and as Advil. Now, one word of caution. Before you try these drugs, be sure and check with your doctor, because these drugs have many of the same side effects that aspirin does. Often people who are using acetaminophen because aspirin has side effects don't do very well with these two ibuprofen drugs that may not be right for you. That's the time to talk to your doctor.
Psychologically, Dr. Saga, though, it attacks our vulnerability, doesn't it?
Oh, I think it certainly does. I think there's really no problem here when you think about it objectively in finding acetaminophen. I think the problem is really, if you can't trust Tylenol, despite 3 package protections, what can you trust on the counter?
From WNBC-TV, this is News 4 New York with Chuck Scarborough and Pat Harper.
Good evening. More states ban Tylenol capsules while extortionists try to strike it rich from death and terror. And the maker of Tylenol puts a $100,000 price on the head of the person who poisoned some of its capsules.
It is raw reality. A second batch of poisoned Tylenol capsules are found before they can kill, and investigators don't know if any more are out there. Wasting no time, blackmailers who apparently had nothing to do with the poisoning demand $2 million as the price for sparing more lives. The new cyanide-laced capsules were discovered in a Woolworths in Bronxville, just a few blocks from the A&P. It was the source of the Tylenol capsules that killed a young woman. Connie Collins is at that Woolworths for us right now. Connie?
Yes, Chuck, and FBI officials were here all day today questioning employees at this Woolworths store. Of course, this is the store where the FDA yesterday uncovered more tainted Tylenol. And also yesterday, just a couple of blocks from here, the Bronxville police received a letter, a copy of a letter addressed to them and the Yonkers police. The sender had written a most frightening scenario. The letter writer identified himself as the Tylenol killer #2 and demanded $2 million or he would continue to kill.
He wanted $2 million within 72 hours, or he'd continue on with killing this type of crime, but would instill it into the orange juice.
He was going to put it into orange juice?
Case of orange juice, somewhere in Westchester County or in the state.
Federal agents investigating a credit card scam found the original letter at this New Rochelle home. 21-year-old Dwight Gilmore admitted writing the letter. He and 2 others were arrested but not charged with extortion. Bronxville police think the letter is a fraud, but
I don't think at this time this man is this particular individual is a suspect in the murder or the Tylenol adulteration.
But that's not being eliminated.
No, I would say not. I don't think in this business that you eliminate anything.
Last night, the FDA said that the protective seals on the second bottle of tainted capsules found at this Bronxville Woolworth appeared intact. Today, however, the agency was calling it a case of sophisticated tampering.
The most plausible, and I underline most at this time, plausible explanation is it was a tampering somewheres in the vicinity.
The FDA also says the cyanide in both the A&P bottle and the Woolworths bottle are chemically the same. The county DA, however, is not discounting any theory, including one that would point to tampering at the level of manufacture. This, even though one bottle was supposedly manufactured in Pennsylvania and the other in Puerto Rico.
I am advised by the investigators in the case that they have information which would support the possibility that the second bottle, the Woolworth bottle, while having a lot number which was assigned by Johnson & Johnson to Puerto Rico, could have been manufactured in Pennsylvania. So that possibility is still being checked out.
A third suspect bottle found in Shrub Oak in northern Westchester last night and thought to contain cyanide has now been declared a false alarm by the Food and Drug Administration. This is Connie Collins reporting live from Bronxville. Now back to Pat and Chuck.
All right, Connie, thank you. Pat?
Well, as we mentioned, Johnson & Johnson is offering that $100,000 reward for the arrest and conviction of the person who put cyanide in Tylenol capsules. The corporation's chairman made that announcement at a news conference in New Brunswick, New Jersey, and Gloria Rojas was there.
One bottle of poison Tylenol capsules and the death of one woman added up to an isolated incident, according to Johnson & Johnson. Today, investigators have in hand 2 bottles of poisoned capsules, and Johnson & Johnson is now calling it a local incident. The new bottle was contaminated by the same kind of cyanide found in the fatal bottle. It came from the shelves of a Bronxville store just a block away from where the poisoned capsules that killed Diane Ellsroth were bought. A third suspicious bottle proved not dangerous. While both contaminated bottles ended up in Bronxville, company officials say they were manufactured far apart.
The 2 bottles, both in packages of 24 extra-strength capsules, were manufactured in 2 separate plants at Pennsylvania and Puerto Rico and at different times. With the packaging of the first bottle completed on May 17, 1985 in Pennsylvania, and on the second bottle on July 17, 1985 in Puerto Rico.
Company officials discount tampering at the manufacturing plants because of the odds against both such bottles ending up in Bronxville.
The chances of those 2 bottles going through a production and distribution system through 38 states in the United States and ending up a block and a half apart, I think your own arithmetic says it just doesn't seem very possible.
Yes. Chairman James Burke was critical of the local television media in this crisis, claiming coverage needlessly alarmed the public.
I think the local broadcast media has turned this thing into a circus. And I don't think you're doing the public any good, and I don't think you're doing yourselves any good.
Gloria Rojas, News 4, New Brunswick.
Well, Johnson & Johnson is giving refunds or Tylenol tablets or caplets to anyone who returns Tylenol capsules.
Well, because of today's developments, more states, including New Jersey, joined in banning the sale of extra-strength Tylenol capsules. A total of 12 states, plus the District of Columbia, now prohibit the medicine's sale. The ban against the drug was issued yesterday in New York, and in Manhattan today, health department inspectors visited stores checking retailers for compliance with that ban. Among the shops visited, drug stores and discount places along 14th Street. Most merchants have already pulled that drug from their shelves, and the city health commissioner warned there would be penalties for those in violation.
We won't take any action the first time. We will pay a second visit, and if on the second visit the product still is on the shelf, that subjects the shopkeeper to a fine of $500.
Well, random spot checks will continue in New York to make sure retailers comply with the Tylenol capsule ban.
Were the cyanide capsules the work of a homicidal maniac bent on random murder? Well, that nightmarish idea seems a real possibility at this stage of the mystery, partly because no other logical explanation has turned up so far. Mike Taibbi reports.
Despite rigorous and improved packaging standards since the 1982 Tylenol murders, even the makers of Tylenol concede no packaging is tamper-proof. But there is significant evidence that the poison capsules from the 2 bottles recovered thus far were tampered with locally. The 2 bottles came from different factories in Pennsylvania and Puerto Rico and had different expiration dates. The cyanide compound in both bottles was the same, indicating it came from a single source. Since cyanide quickly breaks down the gelatin capsules, the guess is it could not have been in the capsules for more than 10 days. And of course, so far, the cyanide-laced capsules have only been found in the town of Bronxville. And finally, the capsules themselves seem to have been tampered with outside the factory. The Tylenol name logo is misaligned on the contaminated pills. All of which leads to the question, could someone outside the factory have done all that tampering and effectively disguised it? The answer, quite obviously, is yes. The fact is, someone with criminal intent and a little bit of time and money could do a reasonably persuasive job of resealing an open bottle of Tylenol, especially since few people bother to carefully check each new bottle of medication they use.
Fit it to the top and hold it down.
Hobby store owner Bob Calandra says he frightened himself this morning when he pulled some material off his own shelves to see how easy it would be to reseal a Tylenol bottle. With an iron, a hairdryer, and some commonly available synthetic sealing material, he produced a reasonable facsimile of Tylenol's double seal. Using material of the right color and composition and adding the right markings, a Tylenol terrorist could fool any but the most vigilant consumer.
Anybody could do it. Anybody can do it. If you can iron a shirt, you can do this process.
And make it look pretty authentic.
Very authentic.
And if there is a Tylenol terrorist, learning his psychological profile could be a key to finding him or her.
I think we have something that is comparable to the Son of Sam a few years ago. I think we have a full-blown paranoid delusional system, very, very disturbed. Probably the end product of a whole lifetime of sickness. They were hurt and now they're going to get their revenge. And their entire awareness is focused on this. They're very involved with it. They're very careful about it. They're not the usual disheveled kind of maniac killer that sometimes we think of. They're much more careful. I think they know they're like a stalked animal, and they're making sure not to give themselves away.
So what it comes down to is that a killer of distinctive and chilling malice would require very little in the way of expertise and could look like anybody. Mike Taibbi, News 4, New York.
Kramer said the target could be a family member who patronizes the stores involved, the drug company, or just nobody in particular.
Well, it was in Illinois back in October of 1982 that 7 people died from cyanide-laced Tylenol, and James Lewis and his wife were picked up in an extortion plot against Johnson & Johnson. Lewis drew a prison term, but nobody was ever charged in those 7 murders in Chicago. Now, the 2 top Tylenol investigators in Illinois are beefing up their probe. They want to see if there's any kind of a link between the New York poisonings and those in the Chicago area. They are in daily contact with New York authorities and federal lawmen. Paul Hogan reported on the Illinois desk for WMAQ, our sister station in Chicago, and he is in New York with more on that part of the story.
James Lewis has been considered a prime suspect in the Chicago Tylenol murders since the crimes were committed over 3 years ago. First, because he wrote an extortion letter to Johnson & Johnson demanding $1 million to stop the poisonings. And second, because he told federal investigators after his arrest that he thought he knew how the killer loaded Tylenol capsules with cyanide. Since his conviction, Lewis has been held in the federal lockup in Chicago, though his wife, Leanne, was arrested with him when they were found hiding out in a New York transient hotel. She was never charged with the extortion. But in their months of living underground here in New York, James and Leanne Lewis became quite familiar with this city. So it's logical that the FBI and Illinois State Tylenol murder investigators would show continuing interest in Mrs. Lewis's whereabouts, especially after more poison capsules were found here this week. Tuesday, FBI agents went to Leanne Lewis's neighborhood in Boston and talked with people who knew her. Only 4 months ago, Illinois Inspector General Jeremy Margolis flew to Boston with an FBI agent to try to interview Mrs. Lewis about the still unsolved Chicago murders. In Chicago today, her lawyer confirmed that the FBI called him again this week, seeking to interview Mrs. Lewis about the latest Tylenol murder.
And he said he wanted to have all of the suspicion of her as responsible for the latest Tylenol deaths put to rest.
In a telephone interview from his jail cell today, Lewis denied any knowledge of the latest Tylenol murder. "I've heard only bits and pieces about what's happening," Lewis said, "because they're holding me in solitary confinement." Contacted by phone last night in Boston, Leanne Lewis said, "I have nothing to say to the press." Paul Hogan, News 4, New York.
James Lewis is serving 20 years in jail.
Wall Street responded strongly to the Tylenol scare, and the reaction means trouble for Johnson & Johnson, as Mary Civillo reports.
I just want to let you know that Dave Lawson has changed his rating on J&J from a 3 to a 4 today.
On training floors across the country today, it was another bad day for Johnson & Johnson, a firm still reeling from the blow earlier this week. Many investors couldn't dump the stock fast enough when the death of a young Peekskill, New York woman was traced to cyanide-tainted Tylenol, a tragedy all too reminiscent of the string of deaths caused by poisoned Tylenol capsules in 1982. After the news on Tuesday, Johnson & Johnson's stock dropped 6%. By Wednesday, though, it had fully recovered, an isolated incident, investors thought. But with news of more poison Tylenol yesterday, this morning the stock had dropped 12%, twice as far as Tuesday. And analysts here now say they don't think it'll bounce back as quickly.
Once you've had a second one at this stage, people, I think, are now psychologically prepared perhaps for a third or a fourth or any series thereafter.
Lawson's firm changed its advice on buying the Johnson & Johnson stock from neutral to unattractive. Analysts are concerned that the poisoning of the Tylenol capsules will poison the Tylenol trademark as a whole. For Johnson & Johnson, that would be bitter medicine. It is considered the firm's single most important product. Of Johnson & Johnson's $600 million in profits last year, $108 million came from Tylenol. Do you think that it's just the capsules, or do you think it's all Tylenol?
Well, it could be all of them. Right now, we just know that it's the capsules, but who's to say that there isn't on the little white one?
But Johnson & Johnson's chairman today said their research so far tells them not to discontinue or recall the capsule, a form many consumers find the easiest to take.
It may very well be, as it was the last time, that an explanation will occur here that will encourage not only us, but the consumers to want us to continue to market the capsule.
But analysts like Lawson say more drastic measures may be necessary.
I think the odds are very high the company is going to be forced to suspend sale of capsule form Tylenol and very likely recall all existing product of that form that's currently in the market.
But Lawson agrees with Johnson & Johnson that the ultimate decisions will depend on the consumer. Mary Savello, News 4 New York.
After the Tylenol deaths in Illinois, the drug industry and the federal government formed a committee to figure out how to make bottles safe from tampering. Well, now that committee will reconvene to see what more can be done.
Stories tonight, the big reward to solve the Tylenol terrorism, how tamper-resistant packages can be tampered with, then resealed. Up to a half a foot of snow expected by tomorrow. The Giant's Lawrence Taylor reportedly has used drugs and sexy underwear for a romantic Valentine's Day night.
This is the Independent News on Channel 11 with Brad Holbrook and Sheila Steinbeck.
Good evening. The Tylenol poisonings are being called an act of terrorism.
This comes as many states across the country, including New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, have banned the sale of Tylenol capsules. As Alec Roberts reports, Johnson & Johnson has asked Tylenol consumers all over to stop taking the capsules until further notice.
Ladies and gentlemen, what's happened in Westchester and just over 3 years ago in Chicago is an act of terrorism, pure and simple.
The chairman of the board of Johnson & Johnson today offered a $100,000 reward for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the person or persons who killed 23-year-old Diane Ellsroth. The Westchester County woman died Saturday after taking 2 cyanide-laced extra-strength Tylenol capsules.
Capsule container medications are not the only consumable products that are at risk. The safety of all manner of food products is threatened as well.
Yesterday, a second bottle of contaminated Tylenol was discovered at a store less than 2 blocks from where the Ellsworth package was purchased. Although the FDA has warned consumers nationwide not to take any Tylenol in capsule form, investigators still believe the cyanide was introduced after the pills left the factory. But here in Westchester County, the man in charge of the homicide investigation believes that the tampering occurred during the manufacturing process. Westchester County DA Carl Vergari says he's been advised by Illinois authorities that the potassium cyanide doesn't necessarily eat through the gelatin of the capsules within 8 to 10 days, as the FDA has been saying. In fact, he says Chicago investigators have contaminated capsules from 1982 that are still intact.
On the basis of evidence, the FBI laboratories tell us that they're able to determine with a reasonable degree of certainty whether or not a seal has been tampered with, and their laboratory examination has indicated that they were not tampered with after manufacture in both cases.
But if that were true, then how do you explain the fact that the Ellsworth bottle was manufactured in Pennsylvania and the Woolworth bottle was manufactured in Puerto Rico?
Well, it would appear to be that way. I am told that it is possible in some way in the manufacturing process for a bottle of Tylenol, these capsules, to be produced at the Pennsylvania plant and yet contain a Puerto Rican number.
But Johnson & Johnson denies it. Meanwhile, here in New York City, inspectors are going store to store to make sure Tylenol capsules have been removed from the shelves. Any store found to be selling the capsules will get a warning. The second time, they'll get a $500 fine. And in another development, 3 people have been arrested for an extortion letter demanding $2 million and claiming responsibility for the poisoning. However, police have discounted those suspects as extortionists and not the murderers.
Brad. Thank you, Alec. Meantime, Governor Mario Cuomo is asking all Tylenol consumers in Westchester to send Tylenol capsules and the packaging they came in to Johnson & Johnson so they can be examined. The address is Tylenol Exchange, Post Office Box 2000, Maple Plain, Minnesota, 55348. The company says if you do send the product back, you can collect either a full cash refund or coupons for Tylenol tablets.
After the first Tylenol murders back in 1982, Johnson & Johnson began triple safety sealing bottles of Tylenol. But obviously, this safety measure was not enough to deter whoever poisoned the most recent capsules. Now, whoever put the cyanide there was able to make it appear as if the safety seals were intact. Ed Miller takes a look at just how safe safety seals make a product.
There are dozens of different types of safety seals, all designed to make medicines tamper-resistant. Specially designed plastic tapes or caps that must be broken before you can get inside. Some of the bottles are covered with a metal foil, laminated with plastic. Some double or triple sealed. Others, containers within containers. But just how tamper-resistant are these?
Thank you very much, sir.
Myron Kainer has been a pharmacist in Queens for 38 years, and he tells me some of the seals are easy to break.
These seals can be reproduced, or they can be made to go back on, and somebody bent on doing something awful can do it. If a person is of a mind to cause terror, they're going to do it.
This particular seal is called a wet seal. As you can clearly see, hot water allows the seal to be slid off and can then be put back on without leaving a trace of tampering. Once it dries, it shrinks back tightly around the cap. Other seals can be taken off and then resealed with an electric heat sealing machine, similar to the kind that seals plastic around many fresh vegetables.
If someone is able to get inside a bottle with a safety seal, what about the poison itself? Well, in the case of cyanide, cyanide is available. It is used by jewelers and photographers. It is also used as an insecticide and for electroplating. Many other poisons are also available, many of them sold right over the counter in hardware stores.
Cyanide's not a controlled substance, and we deal mostly with controlled substances. They've sent us out today on the Tylenol as a state emergency.
Cyanide is available?
I believe it is, yes. It's an industrial chemical, and apparently can be purchased.
In the case of Tylenol, it is triple protected, including a box with glued flaps, a heat-shrunk band around the cap, and an aluminum foil laminated to the tip of the container. Still, could someone break all three seals to possibly tamper with the product?
If this was done, it's been done by somebody who is very, very bright and who has technologies that we haven't yet been able to figure out.
Johnson & Johnson adds that there is no such thing as tamper-proof. The company says you can only discourage someone from getting inside the bottle, make it hard for someone. Therefore, they prefer the phrase tamper-resistant. Sheila, Brad.
Thank you, Brad.
Good evening. This is the 10 o'clock.